Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. Welcome back to Chemist 3064. This will be our first online lecture. So it's going to be a pre-recorded lecture, so you need to listen very carefully. Right, the first question is, who are the most important people to a company? Are they the workers, the leaders, customers, or investors? Now, there is the first question. Keeping that in mind, all right, today we are going to continue with Learning Unit 3, Stakeholders in SHRD. Before the MCO, we have started Learning Unit 3, and we have talked about the role of HRD practitioners. What should HRD practitioners do in managing or in operating SHRD? Now today we are going to talk about the stakeholders in SHRD. Now, so the lecture contract, there are 4 items that we're going to talk about. Now, the first one is to define the term stakeholder and also to describe the nature of these stakeholders. Number 2, we are going to discuss the models of stakeholders management. That means, how do we manage the stakeholders that we have identified earlier on? Right. Number 3 is, now these stakeholders, they have a certain level of power, dynamism, or predictability and interest in SHRD. So we need to know the level so that we know how to manage them. And lastly, we will explain the significance of stakeholders in HRD policy implementation. So these are the 4 items in our lecture contract today. Now moving on. Now in the introduction here, we need to know that there is a need for a stakeholder theory to manage HRD in our organization. Now, with such a theory, it means that we acknowledge that managers or HR managers have a duty to stakeholders. Now, as Garaban in 1995 says, now these stakeholders, they have different values and expectations. So because of this, they will have different reactions to HRD. So definition of stakeholders, number 1, Freeman and Reed in 1983 gave 2 definitions. One is a narrow definition, which says that stakeholders are people who are vital to the survival and success of the business. They are important. And a broader definition which says that a stakeholder is any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the business or functions. Now, more definitions of stakeholders given by Sui in 1989, who says that stakeholders are client, customers who depend on, but at the same time have control over your policies and activities within the organization. And no parties with an interest in a company's success include shareholders, employees, customers, and the community. So, in short, who is a stakeholder to SHRD? So, a stakeholder to SHRD is anyone whose actions can affect the management of SHRD activities within the organization. That's the conclusion. And if we look at the next slide here, it shows you that stakeholders can be divided into 2 types. External stakeholders and internal stakeholders. External stakeholders are those individuals who is outside your company. For instance, government, shareholders and customers and suppliers, whereas internal stakeholders are those within the company. People that you find inside the company, like the owners of the company, employees, and manager. If you look at this slide, now stakeholders can also be illustrated by using an iceberg. Now, if you look at the iceberg, the top of the iceberg is shareholders. That means that people know shareholders are definitely those people who are interested in your company. But more importantly, there are other stakeholders who are also equally important, but well, people do not really pay much attention to them, yeah, or they are not considered as important as shareholders. So those below the level, yeah, of the C are those like the employees, the supplier, customer, government, and so on and so forth. So this iceberg analogy is given by Edward Freeman in 1984. And it also shows the value, yeah, because like I said, once something is above, then we will see it as very important, like the shareholders. This is very important, so we can see it. Yeah, those underneath the water level, we cannot see them, but they are equally important. Now, so what does this means for HRD? So because there are so many stakeholders, there are different stakeholders, they are internal and external. So HR should try to understand what are the expectations of these stakeholders and to assess what kind of power they have over your HRD, yeah, so that you can manage them well. Now, so in short, you have many stakeholders, they have different expectations, and these stakeholders, they have different power and maybe different interests over HRD. So you have to know how to manage them as a HR practitioner. So how do we do that? Now you can use two models. Basically, there are two models how you can manage these stakeholders. Now this model will explain how you will handle these stakeholders, and in order to do that, you must have your own strategy so that you know how to influence them and get them on your side, so that it's easier for you to operate your HR activities. Now the first model is called single sovereign model. Right, if you look at the diagram here, you can see that it's very hierarchical, whereas the human resource development specialist is at the top, then the control goes to the advisors, and from the advisors it goes down to all the stakeholders. Yeah, S here stands for stakeholders, so there are stakeholder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. So this is the single sovereign model. Single sovereign in the sense that it's top down. Now the second model is called the stereo model. If you look at the stereo model, it's different from the single sovereign model, whereas the human resource development specialist is in the middle, and all the stakeholders are arranged around him or her. So when we look at the two models, single sovereign and stereo models, we can compare them. Now the next slide will show you, how we compare between the two models in terms of different aspects. Altogether, there are 19 aspects that we can compare between them. Yeah, so let's have a look at how we compare them. Right, now the next few slides will show you the comparison, of the different aspects, the 19 aspects. So I do not intend to explain every one of them. You can read them on your own. Right, now I will just explain one or two. Right, now the first one, in terms of planning focus. Now the single sovereign model will react to problems as they arise. So in single sovereign, they are reactive. Whereas for stereo model, they are proactive. Yeah, meaning to say they will identify the problems before it happens, and they are ready, for the problems if they happen. So in terms of planning, single sovereign is reactive, waiting for things to happen, whereas the stereo model is proactive, identifying the problems before they start, so that when it happens, they can handle the problems well. Now another area of comparison is number 4, view of learning. Now different models will have a different view of learning. In the single sovereign model, the view of learning is a one-off event, and it is also isolated. That means to say that when you conduct training, they will conduct it like once, and isolated in the sense that it does not happen regularly. Whereas stereomodel model is different. They see learning as ongoing. That means it happens regularly. So the next few slides explain the other areas of comparison. Right, so let me explain number 7, the aspect of view of training and development expenditure. Single sovereign will view the cost, the money that you spend on training, as a cost. That means that it's costing money to the organization. Whereas stereo model has a more positive view of training and development, where it views training and development as an investment. Investment meaning to say that you will get something back at the end when you do training and development. Right. Then the next few slides, all right, cover the rest of the 19 aspects. So I hope you will read through these slides to compare between single sovereign and stereo model. Now, after knowing the difference between stereo model and single sovereign, we will want to know, the power and the interest of these stakeholder groups. So that is the next section. Now, in order to assess this power and dynamism and interest, we need to do a mapping. So when you have a mapping, then you will know that which group is the most powerful, which group has the most influence on HRD, so that you as a HR practitioner will know how to handle them well. Right, so the first one is stakeholder mapping of both internal and external stakeholders. Now, let's start with internal stakeholders. Now, when we talk about internal stakeholders, we are referring, if you look here, to those stakeholders inside the company, which is top management, personnel specialist, line specialist, and individual employees. So these are the internal stakeholders, and we will try to do a mapping of these stakeholders. Now, if you look at this, we have already mapped these internal stakeholders to each other. Now we'll start looking at the left side, which is power. You will see that power can be divided into high power and low power. So among these stakeholders, there are people who have high power, such as personnel specialists, such as top management, or line specialists. These are the people who have power over HR. And those people who have low power, as you can see here, is individual employees. Employees do not have much say in HR. So that's why they have low power. That's in terms of power. Then let's move on to the top left hand corner, which is predictability. All right, predictability can be divided into high and low as well. That means whether we can predict what they will do. Now, employees, we can predict them, because that's why they have high predictability. We know what they will do. We know what they will expect from your HR activities. Then, but on the other hand, people like top management, also predictability is high. But for line specialists, predictability is low. That means to say They might support your HR activity or they might not. Yeah. Then on the right hand top corner, you will see level of interest. Now, level of interest means to say whether they are interested in HR activities or not. So it can be divided into high level of interest or low level of interest. Now, if we look at here, these top management and personnel specialists are like those who've been in HR. Of course, they have a high interest in HR because they are the one who is involved directly in training and so on and so forth. They have high interest. Yeah. Whereas individual employees, they have very low interest. Yeah. In HR because they just follow instructions. They do not have much say about what you do in HR. So this matrix here maps, yeah, the power, which is on the left hand side, predictability, which is on the top left hand corner, or what we call dynamism, and level of interest, which is on the top right hand corner. So these three aspects are being mapped, and you can see that the different internal stakeholders like personnel, top management, and individuals will indicate the level of their power, level of predictability, and level of interest. Now, moving on, there are some questions that I would like to ask you. Now, for example, looking at that mapping, you can actually identify the stakeholder who is powerful and most difficult to deal with, the stakeholder who is powerful and easiest to deal with, and the stakeholder who is less powerful and easiest to deal with. Now, to show you this, let's look at the next slide. Now, so if you can see, yeah, based on the mapping, first, yeah, the group of people or stakeholders with the high power, yeah, and low predictability, they have a lot of power, but you don't know how they will react to your HR activities. So the line specialist will pose the greatest danger or opportunity. They can be dangerous if they are not on your side, but they also can provide opportunity to you if they are on your side, because line specialists are the one who are directly responsible for the workers in the company. Now, on the other hand, they are the group of people who have high power, but then they are easier to manage. Here you can see they are the top management and the personnel specialists, because they have a high level of interest. They have a high level of interest. They have a high level of power. So because their interest, they will support you. So that means top management and personnel specialists, they have high power, they have high interest, and they are easy to handle. So you just keep them informed of what you are doing, right? Now, and lastly, the group or stakeholders with low power and easiest to handle because they are very predictable, that is the individual employees. So employees are the least of your worries, yeah, for any HR activity or plan. On the other hand, the group of people that you must pay focus on are the line specialists. So you need to involve them so they know what is happening and they will support you. Okay, that's the first map. Now, let's move on. Before that, you will see this is how the explanation is from what I explained just now. The line specialist being the most powerful and most difficult group to deal with, right? Because they have very low predictability. You are not sure what they will do. Now, and also in personnel managers or the personnel specialists, that are the one who look after the workers, they are also powerful, but then because they have high interest, that means they will support you, yeah, in your training and development activities. Okay, let's move to external stakeholders. So just now was the internal stakeholders, those people inside the company. Now this next mapping will show the external stakeholders. So who are the external stakeholders here? If you look, these are the people. These are the people from the National Training Advisory, from the government, from the trade unions, from training providers and educational institutions like university, like UNIMAS. So let's have a look at the mapping. Now, if you can understand the first mapping, then the second mapping is similar, right? So again, we start from the left side, where you see power. So again, power, there's high power and there's low power. So those people, external stakeholders who have high power are the trade unions, you can see here, yeah, the National Training Advisory and the National Training Agency. Advisory are those who make the policies and they advise you, whereas the National Training Agency are those people who train, yeah, employees. Now then, low power will be the training providers, the educational institutions like university, like UNIMAS, they have low power compared to trade unions and the government. And going to the top left is predictability. Of course, you have high and low. And right is level of interest. You have high and low as well. This mapping is similar to the one that we saw earlier, which is for internal stakeholders, but this one is for external stakeholders. So likewise, we can also identify who is the most powerful and most difficult to deal with, who is the most powerful and easiest to deal with, and who is less powerful and easiest to deal with. So if you can see here, the one which poses the greatest danger because they have high power. They have high power, but they have low predictability. High power, but low predictability. That means you do not control them. You do not know what they will do in terms of HR. So that will be the National Training Advisory. Now the National Training Advisory is usually in the government, yeah, and they will be the one to make policies and regulations and new rules and law on HR. So you have to make sure you know what they are doing. Yeah, they are the one who are making the rules and regulations, so you have to follow them. If you do not follow them, that means you might be charged. You have to pay some kind of penalty if you do not follow the rules and regulations. Now, likewise, another group with high power, they are the trade unions. They are very powerful. Trade unions are very powerful because they fight for their union members. They are very powerful. But then they are not as dangerous as National Training Advisory because they are predictable. They have high predictability. You know what they are going to do. Now, trade unions, they will only react negatively if you do not support their members. But if you support them, they will give you support in return. So trade unions are not as dangerous or not as powerful as National Training Advisory. Okay, so you just need to keep them happy, the trade unions. Now, lastly, the group with low power and high predictability, so they are the easiest to handle. Yeah, they don't have much power, and yet you can still predict them. So these are the external training providers. They are the the training providers will depend on the company, yeah, whether the company wants them to do training or not. That is the external training providers. So they have very little power about what you want, what kind of training you want, and so on and so forth. So they depend on you to engage them or to employ them as their training providers. So this second mapping is for external stakeholders. So we have seen mapping for internal stakeholders and second mapping for external stakeholders. Now this explains the second mapping, which is external stakeholders, where the national training advisors are the most important, because they are most important, they are very powerful, because they can block your strategies. Yeah, whatever you plan, if you do not plan it correctly, they are able to stop you from doing it. Yeah, and they are also usually the one to approve the financial support. So if you want to get some sponsorship for training, these are the people who can approve or disapprove. So that's why they are very powerful. On the other hand, the trade unions, they have high power, but because they are predictable, yeah, so it's easier to handle them. But having said that, you must make sure that you inform them of whatever important HR decisions you have made, and to get their support. Then they will be on your side. Right, so moving on to the last part of the lecture today, which is the role of stakeholders in HRD implementation. So we have talked about, number one, what are stakeholders? Number two, the two models of stakeholders. Number three, the power, the predictability and interest of these external and internal stakeholders to HRD. So next we move on. Yeah, what do they do in terms of HRD implementation? So research has shown that, yeah, whatever you do in your HR unit, a lot of people are interested. And who are these people? These people are the stakeholders. They have an interest in what you do. Why? Because they have different expectations. Yeah. So when they have different expectations, whatever you do will have to cater to these different groups of stakeholders. Now, for instance, let's talk about internal stakeholders of top management. Now, top management, they are interested in what you do because they expected training and development to be an investment. They spend money on training and development, and they will expect some kind of return of investment from this training and development. That is top management. Yeah. On the other hand, employees, they have low power and high predictability. So they will usually follow your instructions if you send them for training and development. And then there are the external stakeholders. The external stakeholders will involve the government, the government in which HR will need to follow the rules and regulations from the National Training Advisory. Yeah. And then university also as an external stakeholders will be trying to ensure that the curriculum in the university will produce students who are needed, by future employers. So because of these different stakeholders, then HR must make sure that they know who are important and who they should consider when they are making their HR plans. Right, so in short, This is last two slides will tell you all important reminders. So because there are many stakeholders, so HR efforts, your training and development plan, you need to consider all of these stakeholders. And because these stakeholders have different values and expectations, yeah, so you must know how they influence, what are the power they have, and how they will impact on your HR activities. So it's important to get them on board, meaning to say get them on your side. Otherwise, they will not support you. And once they do not support you, it's very hard for you to conduct your HR activities. Okay, next. Now, remember we talk about two models for stakeholders management. One is single sovereign, the other is steerer model. Now, this steerer model with the HR specialist in the middle and with all the stakeholders around it, so it is considered that model is most effective. Yeah, because in the model, steerer model, the HR specialist will consult or will discuss with all the stakeholders before he or she implement the HRD activities. Yeah, if you remember in the steerer model, it's more top down. So top down in the sense that the HR specialist will give instructions on what to do to those people down there. So maybe they are not favorable, maybe they don't like your instructions, so they just have to follow. So they are not going to be very supportive. So if you want a better relationship between HR and all the different stakeholders, it's better to use the steerer model. Yeah, right. So these are the references that you can refer to. I have posted this article by Garavan in 1995, and most of the information that we have discussed comes from this article. So you can refer to that, or you can refer to No 2010 Employee Training and Development, which is a book you can get online. Yeah, it's also in our library, so you can borrow the book from the library too. Okay, with this, thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the next lecture.